I hope you're enjoying your Thanksgiving weekend. I've been talking about the transition to fall for the last couple months. All of a sudden, here we are. Seems a lot more like winter in many spots. So what we have here at the start of this briefing is we have a pretty widespread winter storm going on. These are the weather advisories or winter storm warnings over the Midwest and Great Lakes. And you can see that here. This is the current situation. This is a snow shield. The darker shades are the heavier snow. And then what happens here? Look how it changes. Higher reflectivity. That is where it changes to sleet and then to rain. And if you look at the dew points here, look at this green shades, 40s and 50s. We're feeding some higher moisture into that system. That's why it's a wet system. That's why the rain and snow is widespread and in some cases sort of heavy. Okay, so this is the precipitation last week. Over the southern tier of the U.S. is where we had the most rain. And, I think I mentioned it in a post last week that sometimes things just don't work out because that's the La Nina region that's usually pretty dry. So sometimes a synoptic pattern can sort of override the climate pattern, and we can certainly get the opposite of what would normally be expected. So this was the rain or the precipitation last week. If we look at the snow last week, we're going to have several snowstorms. This was the first one, the upper Midwest, northern Rockies into the Great Lakes, and then the one we're having at the current time is the second one. Now I tell you, in some areas it's sure feeling like winter. Look at the northern Rockies and the upper Midwest where we have snow on the ground, and wind chills this morning are 10 to 20 below zero. So that feels like core winter in that region. But overall last week, temperatures were a little bit above normal in yellow and more modestly above normal in the orange. Okay, so what we have here is we have a Alaska ridge type pattern. That's this orange here, a ridge of high pressure in Alaska, and then the jet stream bows down in the central U.S. And this is associated with colder air in the central and eastern U.S., milder air in the Pacific and Alaska. By the middle of the month of December, we switch that. We bring low pressure into the Gulf of Alaska, and we bring a ridge of high pressure over a good part of the U.S. That'll be moderating temperatures. So we look at the big picture for most areas, colder and then milder. And we can see that in the jet stream this week. Here's the Alaska ridge, and here's the dip in the jet stream with the cold weather over the central U.S. Not much change by Wednesday. So when we take a look at temperatures for the next 15 days, you can see a lot of blue there over the central U.S. But then as we start to get into the middle of the month, we start to get milder weather. Now look at the western U.S. That's under the ridge of high pressure, an Alaska ridge, and that stays mild. So the western U.S., milder than normal. Large areas in the central and east below normal. And then as we switch our weather regime by mid-month, that's when we start to get mild. Okay, so take a look at Wednesday in some areas of the upper Midwest. We are looking, and the Ohio River Valley, we are looking at 10 to 20 degrees below normal high temperatures. So this week's going to be very cold. Many parts of the central into even the eastern U.S. Now what about rain and snow? Well, here's the precipitation. This is mostly snow in this area, and we're going to have a chance of some heavier rain from East Texas across the southeast. Snowfall over 6 inches to over a foot, 6 to a foot right in this region here. So very difficult travel conditions if you're in that area heading back from Thanksgiving. Use caution. And finally, this is week 2. This is gradually going to be retreating, this cold air, but you can see starting week 2, it still lingers. So Great Lakes, we're looking at 2 weeks of colder weather in northeast U.S. as well. Western U.S. going to enjoy some milder weather as we start December. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your Thanksgiving weekend, and drive safely if you're on the road. And I'll be getting back to my regular post as we go through the week. Take care.